We are going to talk about transition today. Around the school, around the seminary, everywhere I go, I see new faces. I see people walking with kids that I haven't seen before. And that's because we're a culture that has semi-permanent transitionality. What does that mean? That just means we're always in change. We're like a tide pool. So you know what a tide pool is by the ocean. The water comes in and fills it full of new life, and then the next tide comes through and pulls it all back out. And we're a lot like that because we have new students coming in, and then we get to know them and we love them and work with them, and then they leave, and then we have new students coming in. As well as that, we have like courses that change and programs that change and technology that changes. And pretty soon we feel like we're in a completely different environment. But not only does that happen here at Asbury, that's part of our culture. We live in a culture of semi-permanent transitionality. That's one of the buzzwords when you talk about transition. It's big, but it really just means things are always changing and we're all impacted by that. Think about the old woman, maybe the 75-year-old woman standing outside a debit machine for the first time. How confusing and overwhelming that feels. Or think about the kid who's being dropped off for their freshman year at a university. First time away from home, they don't know the systems, they don't know what to expect, just feeling overwhelmed, even though that was exactly what they wanted to do. So the experience of transition has nothing to do with our desire for what we're going for, but it has to do with the experience between one normal and the next normal. In between that is this vast chaos of horror for some of us, just trying to fit in, trying to make life work. So let's just talk about it. I'm going to talk about transition in the terms of making a move, a major move, because you can talk about it from many perspectives, but a major move is one of the largest transitions. And when you think of a major move, you could be thinking of a marriage, you could be thinking of a move to a new place, a change of job, a change of location where you're living, residential. Every transition begins with an ending. We don't think about that. We think about the beginning. But there are good endings and there are bad endings. And the way you have a good ending is that there's honesty, first of all. That people know what you're doing and that you honestly say things like, our friendship is going to change. It's not going to be like it was before. And you cry together or you talk about it and you really face the fact that this is going to change your whole life. Another part of a good, healthy transition is that you deal with what's going on in your life. You deal with your problems. One of the temptations of an ending is that, yay, I get to leave old Mrs. So-and-so behind. I don't have to deal with those kids down the block, or I don't have to deal with this problem. That's why a lot of pastors end up going to a church and they meet at the door a great big problem. It's because the last pastor left and part of his leaving was unhealthy. He left problems unfinished. Another thing that's important about a healthy transition, the leaving part, is that you are properly farewelled. If you're forced to kind of skip out of town and the life that you've lived isn't honored and celebrated, then your transition is going to suffer. And how you leave is going to really affect how you enter. Because what you leave behind and what you drag in with you is really going to affect things. Think, for instance, of a person who transitions and their ending is all about, okay, we're going to stay friends. We're not going to ever change our friendship. We're going to talk every day. I'm not going to let you go. And so this person comes to a new place and they have this kind of bond with their old friendship network that they're going to not break. Well, what happens is they have difficulty then entering into their new friendships. And when they do, they feel disloyal. They feel like they're breaking trust with their old friendships. And there's this kind of like a wall they have to get through. Picture instead that this person sat down with their old friends and said, man, this is going to change everything. And I don't know how it's going to work. And I don't know where we'll be in 5 years, but I want you to go ahead with your life and I'm going to go ahead with mine and let's see how we're going to connect. So the person arrives in their new setting and they begin to enter in. They feel free to lean in. Their friends are interested to know how they're making new relationships. And then they can still connect to their old friendships, but not in an everyday social kind of way. Some of the great thinkers have said things like a person cannot contain or keep more than 3 or 4 relationships going. Well, if you're trying to keep 3 or 4 relationships going from your past situation, it really will hamper your present situation. So that's just one example of how you leave will affect how you enter. One thing that's common among most people is that the choice to change is very hard. And to get the courage to change, there's usually only 2 things that will drive us to the place where we're willing to change. One of that is pain. If there's enough pain in your situation, you might be forced, you might be pushed to make a change. The other option is vision. If you can dream a new dream and see what you wanted to see and see that you could do something new, then you might have the courage to change. So we hope that many of the students who are coming to Asbury are coming here because they have a vision for the future. They are coming to school because they think this new place will give them a wider view of life, will give them more opportunities. Coming here is going to change their future, and that's their dream and that's the vision. And that is the thing that has given them the courage to make this change. Let me give you a little illustration though about how this works. Think about yourself at the bottom of this magnificent roller coaster, and you're going to go on this ride, and the roller coaster is, say, in New York City or some beautiful city that you want to see. So your idea is, when I get to the very top of this roller coaster, I'm going to be able to look out and see the whole city. So you get on the roller coaster and you start the ride. But when the roller coaster is going its fastest and you're at the top or you're flying over the hill, actually you don't see the whole city. Instead of your view getting wider, your view gets smaller. You see the head in front of you. Or you see nothing at all. And you just fly over it. So actually the thing that you expected to make everything larger at first makes everything smaller. And that's very like transition. Transition tends to squeeze us. And although we usually enter it with very much excitement and joy. So you enter like a tourist. I think of students coming here to Wilmore. We're a really small town. We have one street that's our main street. We've got 2 or 3 businesses, 1 or 2 options to eat, you know, a hairdresser. And students come in and they're like, it's Mayberry, I love it, it's so sweet, it's so cute. Until they can't get the food they want, they get a haircut and it's terrible, or it doesn't suit them, it's not what they used to have, or they have no idea how to get their needs met. And suddenly, what as a tourist was novelty becomes grim because it's the life they have to live. And what essentially is happening is this. You are most sane and most healthy when you are present oriented. When you are living in the present, you are living in your day, you fit, you know where you fit, you have a way to contribute, you know how to get your needs met. Because see, we are ourselves, we experience ourselves as a person in a circumstance. We like to think that we are like sort of autonomous, we would be the same in any circumstance. But in fact, we are a person in a circumstance. We know how to live in that circumstance. We know what the language is. We have relationships. We have some kind of status. We have some kind of security. So what happens is you get into a transition and you've left behind your present orientation because you're going to move into the future. But before you get into the future, you go through this no man's land where you don't like the present. You can't abide what the present is. You don't have a sense of security. You don't know how to get your needs met. And so you have to live through this time of turmoil until you get to a place where you're back into a normal situation. I have a friend who was a farmer. He grew up as a farmer. He inherited the family farm. It was in Alberta. I'm a Canadian. And in the late 80s, what happened to my friend is that he lost the farm. Of course, we had many jokes about that, but he lost the family farm and it was auctioned off and he moved to the city with his family. Now, here's a guy who knows everything about farming. He can read the weather, he can fix any farm machinery, he works with animals, he can negotiate prices, he knows how to get his crops sold. This is a guy who was a very efficient farmer, and if it wasn't for the economic downturn, he would have farmed his whole life. So he comes to the city, and he has language, but he doesn't have a language anyone cares about. No one in the city wants to talk about weather the way he talks about weather. No one in the city cares about how to fix a combine or how to solve a problem with his cows. So he's in the city with all this knowledge and no one to give it to. And what does that do? It causes another big term, ego dissolution. In other words, suddenly he feels like, I'm stupid. I can't do anything. I have no value. I'm useless. That's not true. He is useless in this circumstance. Over a period of almost 10 years it took him, he came to a place where he is now valued in our culture in the city. He has a job, he has status, he knows how to get his needs met, his family's needs met. But that was a huge life transition for him. Well, even if you put that on a smaller scale, and you realize that you come with language, you come with skills. Maybe you were the one who people went to get their needs met. Maybe you were the go-to person. You had all the connections in town. Or maybe you knew where everything was in your church or in your business. So you come to a new place, and suddenly you can't even find the key. You walk in the wrong classroom. You can't get anything done. No one comes to you. You feel like you could die in your house and no one would find you for 2 weeks. I mean, you just feel statusless. Well, that's very usual. That is how transition feels, because we have to work then to build the new normal. We have to work to know the language of the place, to know how to get our needs met there, to know what we can contribute and how we can fit in. So that's just how I'd like to end. I'd like to talk to you about how you can work to fit in and how you can get through this transition time and find yourself loving the new normal. Okay, how do you get through a transition? There are really two things that are important about getting through a transition. The first thing is gentleness. You know, we tend to be very hard on ourselves, and we tend to say things to ourselves like, if I was a better person, I could handle this. Or even worse, we doubt our calling or we doubt our choice. Wow, did I make the wrong choice? I can't do this. Or we come into seminary, for instance, and we start thinking, I'm not smart enough for this. I can't do this. I couldn't even cope with this. And this ego dissolution, all that we felt was strong about ourselves begins to just crumble down. If you're living with other people, you have to understand that everyone experiences transition differently. It's a lot like grief. Some people in their grief want to express it and cry, and other people want to withdraw and be alone in the darkness. Some people go to work and they just work hard. Other people have to express it through creativity. They've got to write poetry or they've got to paint. Well, transition's a lot like that. If you're a family, for instance, and you're a man and a woman and a child, each of you may be going through transition very differently. The problem is it doesn't label itself as transition. A child might start wetting their bed again when you'd gotten them through all that, or they might start throwing temper tantrums. And your temptation is, we've got to discipline this child because our family looks terrible here. Well, the fact is that the child is probably in transition, feeling dislocated, feeling your dislocation. And what that child needs is gentleness. Maybe you're a man with a wife, and your wife was always outgoing, and now she wants to stay in the house, and she doesn't want to talk to anyone, and you're like, come on, hon, you've got to get out, you've got to do this, and you're just pushing her. Maybe what she needs is some gentleness. Maybe she needs you to hold her hand and walk around the block. I just would like to really suggest that the way through transition is not aggression. It's not forcing it. You have to transition gently. And the more gentle you are with yourself and others, the less toll it will take on you, and probably the easier you'll get through it. One of the things to remember is this is not a spiritual problem. This is not you failing God. Like, if God called me to do this, why am I so unhappy? And there's this huge sense of failure you can have. This is not about you failing God. This is about you figuring out how to be present in a new circumstance. So that's the first thing, is gentleness. The second thing is you must lean in. Now, this is a time when you want people to come and make friends with you. You really need hospitality. And if things are working well, you'll get hospitality. I hope wherever you are, you're going to get hospitality. But you know, even the best hospitality can leave you cold. Like, have you ever been in a new place and someone invites you out for coffee, and you go out with 3 people and you have coffee, and it's happy and you chat and it's good, and you go home and you're lonelier than you were before you went? Well, that's because those aren't your 5-year friends. They're your 25-minute friends. And it takes a while before you get that emotional satisfaction from being with people. So you have to keep leaning in, even though you hate leaning in. Nothing's harder than walking into a cafeteria or a coffee shop and looking around and not knowing where you should sit. So find a seat that's empty and go and say, can I sit here? Nothing's harder than walking into a chapel service or walking into a classroom and not yet having your corner to sit in. But the way to find your corner is to simply keep going. Show up. And what you're going to find out is if you're here at the seminaries, there's lots of people who feel like you. And in our culture, there's lots of people who feel like you. There are other people looking for a place to lean in. And maybe you can become a person that recognizes someone else and you can say, Mark, come sit with me. And you can give that gift to someone else. Another thing that you can do is build small patterns. Sometimes we think it's the great events that make us feel at home and make us feel secure. It's like a big Christmas party or a big Thanksgiving dinner with our family. But actually, you might be surprised to find out, we begin to feel secure and at home by repeated small patterns. For instance, if you walk the same way to school every day, if you park your car in the similar place, if you go by the coffee shop and get a coffee and say hi to Erin and get your coffee and drop a quarter in her tip box and then leave, and you do that 25 times, one day you're going to go by and you're going to really like doing it. It's going to feed your soul. So you start to develop patterns. And the problem is that you'll want to have the same pattern you had in your old normal. And that may not work where you are. It may not work in your new job. It may not work in your new place. So be open to starting a new pattern. Start a new small ritual with your family. Start a new small ritual with a friend. Meet every Friday morning for coffee with some people. Join a Bible study. Just do something that becomes a pattern in your life and you can repeat it over and over and start to feel more secure. I wanted to tell you a few upsides of transition because I've talked a lot about how the struggle is. One of the upsides is that a time of transition is a time of liminality. It really puts you on the edges of life. You're not as busy, things aren't as intense, your schedule's probably not as full. And what happens is you have space for reorientation. The way I think about it is life is like a frozen, I'm from the north, so it's an ice illustration. Life is like a frozen pond with all the furniture frozen in it. And you really can't move the furniture around. But once in a while, the pond thaws and you can shuffle all the furniture around and it's going to freeze again. So instead of lamenting that the pond is thawed and nothing feels secure, it's a time you can move your furniture around. You can shape your life a little better. Maybe you never exercised. And now you say, you know what? I'm going to start running or I'm going to start walking. It's going to be part of my ritual. And you can make that shift. Or maybe you can do something that has to do with hospitality or take on a project that you always wanted to do but never had to do. So, and then it will freeze and that's how you're going to be for a while until it thaws again. A second thing about transition is it's a time when you can discover your truest desires and longings. You know, when our needs cease to be met, when we get stripped down to just a few things, we discover what we really need. You know, I'm a mom and my kids are all grown and they're all busy and they really don't think they need me. And that's the season we're in. They're all busy and they're all doing their thing. But if their life got stripped down and they only had a few things happening, our relationship might change again. They might discover that they really want to reconnect with me. So this isn't about your mother, although if it needs to be, you just take my advice. But the thing is that when your needs aren't all being met, you discover what is it I really need. Like maybe you really have to pray. Maybe you haven't been a person who's thought you were much of a prayer. But you know what? Now you're lonely and now you're struggling and every day you get up with kind of a lump in your throat. And then you think, oh, Jesus, I really need you. And so all of a sudden you're praying in a way that you never prayed before, which takes us to another advantage of transition, and that is that when our needs aren't all being met or we're not sure how to meet them, we have an opportunity to abandon ourselves to God at new levels. These are very important times in our life. And trust me, you only get these times 3 or 4 times in your whole life. where you have a reorientation of your understanding of yourself and of God and of life. And then last of all, it's a time when meaning changes. Because you're not going so fast, because life isn't so expected, because life isn't so predictable, things take on new meaning, and you start to realize what a conversation might mean, or what an idea might mean, or what a beautiful sky might mean. Let me just encourage you with this. In our culture, we are all in transition, almost repeatedly. You just get out of one and you're going to be in another one. Some are as small as arriving home from vacation and wondering why you're all bickering when you had a great vacation. That's transition. Or it might be as large as a move, where you've left your family and you're all on your own at university for the first time, or maybe you're a widow, or maybe you're in a new job and you don't know how to fit in. You will have to face this period of transition. Expect it. Enter into it with some sense of humor about yourself. Do what you need to do to get through it. Be gentle with yourself. Do things that soothe your own soul. And keep walking and try to keep your eyes on others. Transition makes us very self-focused because we're so needy. Try to just look outside yourself a little bit. Keep leaning in. And what you're going to find is one day you walk into that office or you drive into your little town and you're going to say to yourself, I love it here. And you're going to realize how much you've grown, and you're going to love what's happened to you and the changes in your life. So the risk is worth it. The transition is not easy, but in the end you've got something new.